I'm Homer Sharpton. I came here in 1924. I lived across the street over here 70 years in these houses over here. So my wife passed away 3 years ago, and I wrestled a bunch of rentals in a home over there for about 2 years, year and a half, and I said, well, I know when I'm beat, so I give up and sold it. So I moved an apartment about 100 feet from the front door over here upstairs, so I didn't go very far. But it's been a pleasure to live in Manitou all these years. Like I say, I came here in 1924. I met my wife. We was first married. We stayed in the old Oklahoma camp across the street here. That's where the apartments are now. Many of you younger ones don't remember it, but the older ones remember there's a bunch of log cabins over there. About 15 log cabins over there. And a shower bath in the middle of it, a toilet for men and women, and that was it over there. And there wasn't no running. We had running water in a little old square sink, and that was it. And that was the plumbing system there. So there's been some changes since then. So now I'm paying rent over there. I'm paying about as much rent then as I'd pay for a year then, I mean now. So there's been some changes made there too. But it's been a pleasure to live in Manitou Springs all these years. And I can tell you a little bit about it. I came here in 24, and I remember, first thing I remember, I mentioned to George a minute ago about the burro barns up around where the old post office used to be, across from his dad's drugstore, where the little arcade is now. That was Jones's burro barns. Jones had a bunch of burros. I imagine he had 15 burros, and he rent them to you for $2, and they'd take you to the top of Mount Manitou. And I think $3, you could stay all night up there. He'd rent you a burro for $3, and you stay all night. And they'd take them burros, and many a time I've seen them go up the street there. George, I imagine, he was too young to remember, our chances are then, but I've seen them go up the street there in a line, just one burro following another one. They'd go up the trail, up through Mount Manitou, up through Ruxton, up the Iron Springs Chateau, and up the hill, up to the top of Mount Manitou, and back the next day. And of course, them burros are worth about $10 a piece. I don't imagine they give any more than that to begin with. But anyway, I spent the summers here for about 8 summers as a barber for about 9 years. I tried every way to figure out to make a living in Oklahoma, and I finally learned the barber business, and I starved to death at that down there. So I finally left and come out here. But it was fun for a few years, but it got to be work. I never did really like the business. I had a shop in the bathhouse, but I had a barber shop, and you had people in Manitou. These younger people don't know. George may remember, they used to have tourists in Manitou. You don't have no tourists anymore here. I mean by the thousand. We used to call it the sheep. Remember it's called the sheep shed, George? Up around the spring up there, we call it the sheep shed. If you wanted to see somebody from Oklahoma and Kansas and Kentucky, just go up the sheep shed and sit down for an hour, and they'd come by there. There's thousands of people in Manitou in them days, and it was a pleasure, I mean, to just sit up and watch the people go by. And I had a little barber shop in the bathhouse, and then I moved it up in the corner where that gun shop is, in a little building. I was there for 4 or 5 years, and then I quit the business completely. But it was long, hard summers then. You worked long hours. They didn't have the time they got now. You got 50 cents for a haircut. Now you get $7 for the same thing, so there's been a little changes made. I never got over 50 cents in my life for a haircut, and 25 cents for a shave, so there's been some changes made. But around the town, around the loop up there, has always been was the tourist business. That was the tourist attraction. That's where all the sightseeing cars, and they wanted me to tell you about these sightseeing cars. The old buses, George can remember them, some of the old timers here can remember them. They'd line up on the street up there and try to pick a tourist up, especially along the park up there, a little along where the Smith's restaurant was them days, and there where you cross going into the park over there, where you cross the bridge. That was the hot spot right in there. They'd all try to beat in there to try to get a car parked there right by the gate, right by the door where they went across the street there. And that was the hottest place in town to pick up tourists from, and that's where they got the tourists. And if they made a big loop, that was Canyon City, and that was a $10 deal, boy. If they'd get 4 of them, that was $40. That went down through the Royal Gorge in Canyon City. That was about I guess, 8 or 9 hour drive. It was all day, I know. If you load them old Pierce cars up, you had them old Pierce cars with the long headlights sticking out of them. That's what they used altogether. In particular, going to the peak, they'd climb that old peak. There's an old big V8 or big straight 8s, and they'd climb that peak up there with 8 or 10 people in them. And they'd stop a couple of times. There's watering holes on the road up the peak, so you have to stop a couple of times and pour some more water in them. But they'd make it to the top of the peak, all right. But it was it's altogether different now. The roads are different, the times are different, the conditions were different, and the living in this place were different. I know we stayed in a little cottage over here. I think I paid $3 a week rent. If it had been $4, I'd imagine I could have paid it. But anyway, you run them all over town for $10 or $15 a month. But there's been a lot of changes. I put in 40 years in the real estate business, and I saw a lot of these changes in the last 40 years before I retired. But the business would drop off at Labor Day. Man, you'd always said you could shoot a gun up and down Manitou Avenue after Labor Day, and that was about right. Boy, they left that morning of Labor Day. They went back to Kansas and Oklahoma. They could make it over that weekend, and that was the end of the trail for them. But it was, and every year was the same. It didn't seem to change for all them years. I don't think now have much bearing on it anymore because you got a different class of people and different conditions over the country. But I remember Sundays we'd always go up Miss Collier's. Miss Collier's had a place on Ruxton up there, just about a block above the Loop, a two-story building. Sits there yet, a white building. I don't know who owns it now. I've known it for years, but you old-timers remember Collier's Restaurant up there. She charged 35 cents through the week and 40 cents on Sunday. We'd go up there, me and my wife, we'd go up there and have Sunday dinner. That was before a daughter was born. We'd go up there and have Sunday dinner and spend that 40 cents a piece for Sunday dinner at Miss Collier's place. And then we'd walk up the Iron Springs. Of course, you walk most of the time. In the days you had plenty of time, so you'd walk. So we'd walk up the Iron Springs, and we'd get up the Iron Springs, and George Riggs would have him and his wife and daughter had a big popcorn stand outfit up there, and you buy a great big sack of popcorn for a dime, about 3 gallons. And after you got through there, me and my wife, and a lot of times we'd walk. We'd go out in Cheyenne Canyon out Stratton Park out there and dance for a couple, 3 hours. We did ballroom dancing for years. We loved to dance. We'd go out there and dance maybe Saturday afternoon or Sunday till 10 o'clock at night. Take an old beat-up Chevrolet. I never went for Ford much. I always had an old beat-up Chevrolet, but we'd get out there and back with it. We didn't have no trouble. But we'd go out there every Sunday. It's all the same things. But there's been a lot of changes made now in the place up there. But at Iron Springs in the summertime, it was a Sunday afternoon. You couldn't get around up there for the people. Everybody would go to the Iron Springs Chateau. Now they named it the Chateau later, but just the Iron Springs Inn. And the main attraction up there was that soda water. They had to go up there and drink that soda water, eat that popcorn. That's the only thing I think they ever had up there, as far as that goes. But the only thing I could see was we had no food. I don't remember him serving any food up there. Around the post office up there, I was telling George Skiving, right across the street from his drugstore where that little arcade is in there, was a post office in there then. It was first in a building west of there, in one of these buildings up there. I don't know what's in there now. Then they moved it, seemed like on the other side, but anyway, that's where the post office was. And that's where Jones's Burro Barn was. And they was in there, had them burros. He had 15 or 20 burros in that little old loop of ground in there, and that's where we did business out of. It was Jones's Burro Barn. But the post office, of course, I remember when they got the new post office, that's quite a thing in Manitou, and they dedicated the new post office up there and had a crowd of people here. It's quite an improvement to Manitou to get a post office like that, because, boy, they hadn't had any before. They just had a little hit and miss. But the town has changed a lot. There's no question about that. But the climates have changed. I remember years ago, I was telling somebody a while ago, we used to get 12, 15 inch snow here in the wintertime. We'd have big snows here. Boy, the last 3 or 4 years, we just haven't had any snow. There's just no snow anymore at all. That little thing we had the other day is 3 or 4 inches, and it lasts a couple hours. So it's got everything changed. The conditions have changed over the country. Of course, everything was cheap then. I remember we used to buy gasoline. We'd fill up, and then we'd wait to get the Colorado line, and we'd fill up in Kansas because Colorado had a 2 cents tax on it. We'd fill up for 9 cents in Kansas. It cost 11 cents in Colorado. We'd always watch that. Remember, my wife come from Oklahoma, and we'd watch that. And we'd fill up in Kansas at the Colorado line. We'd fill up on Kansas gas and drive it into Colorado. But I built this building in 1952. I lived across the street over here. When I was a young man, I served an apprentice with an oil company in Oklahoma as a barber and a carpenter. I was trying to figure out some way to make a living, and those 2 of the hardest ways it was. One of them was a barber, and the other was a carpenter, I think. And then I finally found out I'd live a little easier, and I went to selling business. But I built this building in 1952. This land belonged to the city down here, and they had this. This was part of Briarhurst. This land was originally, this whole valley here all at one time belonged to Briarhurst. And this property laid here for 40, 50 years, since 1906, I think. And they over that fence line there, and it belongs to Briarhurst property. And I heard about it, and I said, we was meeting in an old building up over Skiving the drugstore upstairs on the 3rd floor up there. And boy, them stairs The older you got, the steeper the stairs got. So it just got to the place where people wouldn't go up there because first place you couldn't park. Cars had started coming in, then getting rid of the horses. You couldn't park, so you had to hunt a place to park, walk a block, and then climb them stairs. And then on top of that, you'd carry a bucket of coal up as you went, or a sack full of coal. I know my wife one time, I used to start, she used to tell me, oh, before she passed away a few years ago, about how they had a big meeting and the women all dressed in white. And I had a burlap sack full of coal in the back of an old station wagon in the trunk of it, an old car in the trunk of it. And I got out and carried that thing up, and I guess evidently it must have had a hole in it someplace. When I got up there and they got through, every woman's white dress had a black rim around it, about three, had a border on it, out of coal dust. Boy, them was the days we paid, I think, $30 a month to learn the slots on the building, and we paid $30 a month for it. So I told them, I said, there's got to be a better way than this. So I heard about this property. Of course, I lived across the street over there for years, and I built those duplexes and built a cottage over there. My mother lived in a year or two, and then I rented and put an apartment downstairs. And I said, well, there's got to be a better way. So I found this property, and I don't think the city knew they ever had it, because I was on the city council before, and they never even mentioned it. Oh, it belonged to the city. You know how the city is. They never get around in time to do anything, the next elections anyway. So I found out about it, and I found out what they paid for it, so I just took it to the vote of the people. And I found out then, if you want to get something done in a small town, get a bunch of women. Men won't work, but the women will go out and work. My wife belonged to the Women's Club, and the Women's Club in them days, and I think still is, was one of the big deciding factors in Manitou Springs. It always is in the community if they want something done. So she got off the Women's Club about cleaning the thing up down here. All the neighbors down here was having a fit with flies eating them up. And then old John Aubrey had a saddle stable up here in the alley, and he'd bring them old horses down in and turn them in for the night, and the weeds is about as high as my head. And they'd get water in the creek over here, and the flies just about ate us up down in this neighborhood, this little old camp over here. Had a bunch of cottages, and all the people got up arms down here, and we took it to the vote of the people, and I carried, I think, 68% of the vote to sell it for what they paid for it in 1906. So we started in chopping wood over here, I did, and cut down 4 or 5 trees about that big around. There's one right in this corner. I thought that corner would sink down, but it never did. We cut about 5 or 6 big cottonwood trees out here, and a bunch of brush over here, about as top of my head, weeds and brush. Been in here for 50 years, I guess, and cleaned it all up. And I went to Fred around, and he was president of the bank. He happened to be a member of the Masonic Lodge in Oklahoma City, and he transferred his membership out here. Told him what I was going to do, and we didn't have very little money. And he said, well, Homer, I'll take a chance with you if you'll sign a note. I said, well, that's the only way I'm good to sign a note. So I started building and signing notes, and I hired a couple of fellers, and I worked myself about 10, 12 hours a day, and my wife helped me for the night. And I built it, and I started I think the 7th day of March, and I finished it on the 31st of August, I think the cornerstone says. And I built the thing. I got it paid for in 4 or 5 years. We had everything but bootlegging down here. We had dinners of all kinds. We had every kind of a party there was. And I tried everything to raise a few dollars to get the thing paid for. So it's the hard way. I wouldn't want to do it again. I'm not as young as I was then, but I'll tell you one thing. That's the only way you can do it in a small town. And somebody's got to try it. So I thought, well, I didn't have much to lose. I didn't have enough profit to hurt anything. If it took all that, wouldn't bother me. So it didn't bother me a lot. But it's been a pleasure to put in these years in Manitou, and I can remember a lot of changes in Manitou. Like, I'm very much interested up in Marymount Castle. I'm on the board up there, and I go up and sell tickets a day or two a week, something to do. And it's got to be quite a thing in Manitou. I'm not down here to advertise for Marymount Castle, but it has been an improvement on that hill up there, I'll say that much. It's created a little more traffic up there, but it's a beautiful place to go through, and it's one place you never have a complaint. I've been, like I say, I've put in over 40 years in the real estate business. You always find somebody complain about something, but you never have a complaint up there. You never hear no complaints about it. So it's a pleasure to work up there where people seem to get their money's worth. We don't charge much. That's one complaint very much because they don't pay much. Belvedere, I'll turn it over to you. Now, you've got a lot of pictures you want to show. You tell them what you know about Manitou.